I was coming back from Bilderberg Group about a month ago there in Virginia, and I was in the airport, and there were all these mindless neocon books and mainline stuff and nothing interesting, and I saw Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA. And I have a friend who was an engineer at NASA and actually on the flight line, there in Mission Control for some of the Apollo missions, and he said, running some of the RCA cameras, he said, you ought to read Dark Mission. I'll just leave it at that. A few years ago, and I picked it up and I read it, and so much, everything that I had done my own separate research or run into or seen historically in mainline history, the occult, you name it, everything Richard Hoagland was saying was accurate. And then there are a lot of areas in there that's his original research, and so if everything you know checks out, then it really freaks you out, and you say, this sounds credible. And really a frightening book, because having a shadow government, having an elite where they have suppressed advanced technologies, and we know they have that, they've been caught many times, who knows what's really going on? That's the bigger issue, is we can't trust them. And they've been caught lying so much. And his book gets into Aleister Crowley and all these people being involved in the founding of NASA, which is really mainline history the average person doesn't know, and JPL and the rest of it, that I couldn't put the book down, Dark Mission, New York Times bestseller. I guess other people couldn't put it down either. And he's got a new edition of it out. And I'm telling you, this is just an amazing book. By the way, I'm not selling the book. We have a bookstore online, but I'm not selling the book. I'm saying you really should get the book. And, whether it's all true or whether all of his ideas are right, I don't know. But, he's got quite a pedigree, and he's a really nice fellow, too. Richard C.Hoagland was science advisor to Walter Cronkite and CBS News during the Apollo program, former curator of the Hayden Planetarium and consultant to NASA. He is the co-originator, along with Eric Burgess, of the British Interplanetary Society, of the Pioneer Plaque, that gold plaque they sent out, currently carrying a message for mankind on the Pioneer 10 spacecraft. And it goes on and on and on, all the things he's done, and the Enterprise Institute he heads up. And, of course, he's one of the most popular long-term guests on Coast to Coast AM. So we go to Richard C. Hoagland right now. Richard Hoagland, it is just wonderful to have you on the show with us, sir.
Alex, thank you so much for inviting me, and I must say I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you, sir. You're the expert on all this. First, tell us a little bit about Richard Hoagland. Believe it or not, some of my audience may not know who you are, your saga, your awakening, and then I want to get into the crazy, admitted, this is something you can prove, history of NASA, skip forward to the kidnappings and would-be murders and crazy women running around and the wheels coming off NASA, as you put it. And then we'll go back into the secret government and the Masonic flags and all the really crazy stuff.
Well, you and I and a lot of other people have had an evolution, kind of a maturing. We both grew up, I'm absolutely convinced, even though I don't know your story chapter by chapter, but I'm convinced you grew up like me, believing in, truth, justice, and the American way. And that we lived in the best country in the world, and it was founded by people that had some amazing ideas, and it was the freest, and it allowed people the widest diversity. And it's only as you grow older and you start asking difficult questions, and you pull up the corners of the rug and you kind of look under, that you realize that that is a very carefully kept facade. That, in fact, society we live in now bears no resemblance to what we were taught in school. And about all the silly and stupid things, yes, we're free. About all the important things, Alex, we're not free. And the thing that will make you free is to not believe what you're told. It's as simple as that. So when I started out, squeaky clean mainstream, Cronkite, NASA, museums, science, and all that, and I came through a series of deep penetrating questions to the belief that not only have we been lied to by NASA about almost everything that they've told us that's out there, but we've been told lies about everything that means everything to anybody. And there's almost no limit. I mean, the kind of watchword, the mantra of the Dark Mission is the lie is different at every level. And I was given that by an intel officer who has been one of my dark, deep sources for years and years, who has never steered me wrong.
So you're saying wheels within wheels, lies within lies, piled on the next one.
To maintain the illusion. And, of course, this audience is well familiar with your work. So we can skip all the stuff that I normally have to do to bring people up the curve. And today it might be useful to explore why. What the hell's the end game? What's the point? Why lead people down the primrose path? Where did we go off the path? And how can we get back on the path? Because I firmly believe that we are not powerless, that we actually can change this curve, that we are masters of our own fate, captains of our destiny, but we have to wake up a lot more people. It really only takes about 2%, Alex, to change history.
Well, you're right, Richard Hoagland. Can we go back, though, to your first awakenings? I mean, when did you start at NASA and at CBS and a big curator and, designing what's sent off in spacecraft, a big conceptual guy? When did you start going, something's wrong here?
Okay. Oh, gosh. How many hours have we got? I started out, school and the museum, and I was, kind of a prodigy, and I was the youngest curator in the United States for a while. Of course, I grew out of that one. And when you're 18 in a museum and the mayor is calling you in for advice on how to increase, revenues in the city through cultural diversity and all that, it gives you a kind of heady feeling you can do anything. So I would pick up the phone and I would call anybody in the country. I'd call people at NASA. I'd call people in the government. I'd call people in the military, at the Pentagon. And they would answer, and they would give me answers, and they would return calls and all that. And I finally went to a couple of museums, and I was assistant curator in Hartford, West Hartford, Connecticut. And one day I got a call, and the voice at the other end of the line said, "My name is Frank Manitas. I'm associate producer of CBS News Special Events. We'd like you to help us go to the moon." And like that great line in Bill Cosby's routine, I said, "Come on, who is this? Really?" And it turned out to be Frank Manitas from CBS News. And so I went and had the most extraordinary education at CBS News from 1968, just before the first Apollo 8 mission around the moon, to the early 1970s, 71, I believe. And I'm sure I learned far more than I imparted, because I saw how big media works. I saw how the Tiffany Network, the legendary, legacy of Murrow, actually worked in its heyday when Walter came back from Vietnam, looked into the camera and said, "It's lost." And, Nixon and Agnew said to each other, "Well, we've lost them. The war has to end. If we lost Walter, we've lost the country." I was so privileged to work with a man of integrity, a guy who actually believed the things that he was writing about and reporting on. Remember when Walter was the one dissident voice during the first Gulf War?
Yes.
How he was a voice of reason, saying all we're seeing is basically a scripted television plot. We're not allowed, remember that was before they came up with the idea of embedding reporters so that they basically could watch them 24/7. And there were a couple of guys that struck out across the desert and tried to find independent information and got caught by Saddam and all that. Well, Walter was one of the only voices that basically raised questions about this rah-rah, we're going to go beat this bad guy, the new neo-Hitler. Anyway, so back when I was working for him, I learned about sourcing. I learned the journalism side. I knew the science side, but I really learned journalism at the feet of a guy who really was a master. And I started looking around, and I remember one vivid day. You want to know the moment, Alex, when I began to realize that the facade was not what it was supposed to be?
Yeah, tell me that light bulb moment.
It was very early on. It was critical, and if I hadn't been asked by the Cronkite people to be there and help them create this extravaganza to show people what it was like to go to the moon, I wouldn't have had, I don't think, the light bulb moment, or it would have come a lot later. It was on a Sunday afternoon. There were a bunch of us sitting around in Bob Wessler's office. Bob Wessler was the executive producer of CBS Special Events. He went on to become president of CBS News for a while. Then he went and helped Ted Turner set up his network, which was called CNN. Anyway, Wessler was a child prodigy. He was a brilliant guy, very egocentric, very I mean, in order to be in that position, you got to be, right? And we were sitting around in his office. You know, he had the cabinet open, and there was some, you know, liquor flowing around. We were just kind of watching a news conference that was supposed to be coming in from Houston by satellite from the astronauts. I forget which crew it was coming back from the moon. I think it was Apollo 8. It had to be Apollo 8. So it was December of 1968. And we're sitting around, and there's, you know, a couple of producers and our researcher and me and Wessler and, you know, some people shuffling papers and bringing in stuff from the rest of the office. And we're just kind of, you know, we're kind of laid back because our correspondent there in Houston was going to ask the questions of during the uplink. This was the first time they were going to actually allow correspondents to talk to astronauts directly.